Billionaire was alone and without sex for years until he met this nurse. The shocking truth revealed, "I love you." The words hung in the autumn air between them, raw and terrifying. Jacob Morris stood on the deck of his mountain house, hands trembling, looking at the woman who'd spent the last 3 weeks dismantling 15 years of carefully constructed walls. "I love you," he said again, his voice breaking. "I don't know when it happened or how, and I'm probably doing this completely wrong because I haven't said those words to anyone in 15 years. But I love you, and I don't want you to leave when your vacation ends. I want you here, in this house that's never felt like a home until you were in it." Shirley Hammond stared at him, tears pooling in her eyes. This billionaire who'd survived alone for so long, who'd built empires while forgetting how to be human, was standing before her completely vulnerable, completely terrified, completely real. "Jacob," she whispered. "Please," he interrupted. "I know I'm damaged. I know I've spent 15 years proving I don't need anyone. But Shirley, I need you. I want to learn how to live instead of just survive. And I want to do it with you." But how did a man worth $12 billion end up so alone that a car crash nearly killed him and no one would have noticed? How did a nurse who'd sworn off love after devastating betrayal end up in his mountain fortress, teaching him to be human again? And what does this story reveal about all of us? About the ways we choose safety over connection, survival over living, isolation over the terrifying beauty of being truly seen? This is that story. And I promise you, it's not what you think. 3 weeks earlier, Jacob Morris was dying, and he'd accepted it with eerie calm. The Tesla's dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree, warning lights flashing in sequences that would have been beautiful if they weren't announcing catastrophic system failure. He was doing 65 miles per hour on Mountain Ridge Road, a winding stretch of asphalt carved into Colorado mountainside, where one side offered guardrails and the other offered a 200-foot drop into rocks and pine trees. The steering wheel locked. The brakes didn't respond. The accelerator stayed pressed, though his foot had jerked away in panic. Total electrical failure, some distant part of his brain observed. Every system depended on the main computer, and the main computer just died. He had approximately 8 seconds before the next curve, a sharp left that his car would miss entirely at current speed and trajectory. Strange, Jacob thought as the guardrail rushed closer, that his final thought wasn't about his company or his wealth or his achievements. It was simpler, sadder. No one will miss me. No one will even know I'm gone until Monday when I miss the board meeting. The Tesla hit the embankment at 58 miles per hour. Metal screamed. Glass exploded. The world tumbled in violent rotation. And then, silence. Jacob Morris, billionaire founder of Morris Innovations, lost consciousness thinking he'd just become another statistic. Rich man, expensive car, mountain road. At least the obituary would be brief. What he didn't know as darkness claimed him was that 17 miles away, in the emergency room of Boulder Community Hospital, a nurse named Shirley Hammond was finishing a double shift and debating whether to finally use her vacation time or let it expire unused like she had for the past 3 years. What he didn't know was that his life was about to be saved twice. Once by paramedics who'd reach him in 11 minutes, and once by a woman who'd refused to let him return to the expensive loneliness he'd been calling a life. What he didn't know was that everything was about to change. The call came through dispatch at 6:47 in the evening. Single vehicle accident, Mountain Ridge Road, Tesla off the embankment, driver unconscious, vitals unknown. Shirley heard it over the ER radio and moved into position automatically. Trauma Bay 3 was prepped and ready within 90 seconds. She'd been doing this for 10 years, long enough that her body responded to emergencies before her mind fully processed them. The ambulance bay doors burst open at 7:03. 2 paramedics rushed in with a gurney carrying a man in his late 30s, expensive suit torn and bloodied, face swollen, breathing shallow but steady. Male, approximately 38, found unconscious in a vehicle that went off-road. The lead paramedic rattled off as they transferred him to the hospital gurney. No signs of alcohol or drugs. Vitals stabilized in transit, but he was unresponsive for approximately 12 minutes. Before we arrived, significant head trauma, possible internal injuries, 3 ribs definitely broken based on palpation. Shirley's hands were already moving, checking pupils, assessing breathing, examining the wound on his temple that had bled significantly but wasn't currently life-threatening. Her team moved around her like a synchronized machine, each person knowing their role. "Get me a CT scan, full panel," she directed. "I want to know what we're dealing with internally. And someone find out who he is. Check his pockets, his phone, anything. He'll have family we need to contact. Jenny, one of the younger nurses, returned 5 minutes later with a wallet and a phone with a shattered screen. His name is Jacob Morris, she said quietly. And, Shirley, I looked him up. He's that Jacob Morris, the tech billionaire. Morris Innovations. Shirley glanced at the man on the gurney. She'd heard the name, vaguely. Some software company that had made him extraordinarily wealthy. But right now, he wasn't a billionaire. He was a patient with a brain injury and broken ribs and no guarantee he'd wake up. Family? She asked. Jenny shook her head. I tried the phone. It's locked. Facial recognition won't work because of the swelling. I checked his wallet. No photos, no emergency contact card, nothing personal at all. Just credit cards and a business card for a law firm. Call the law firm, Shirley instructed. Someone there might know who to contact. The CT scan revealed a significant concussion but no brain bleeding. 3 broken ribs as suspected, extensive bruising, and a miracle. He should have died in that crash. The embankment had stopped the Tesla 5 feet before a sheer drop that would have sent him tumbling 200 feet down the mountainside. Jacob Morris woke up 43 hours later to fluorescent lights and the antiseptic smell that announced hospital before his eyes fully focused. Everything hurt. His head throbbed with each heartbeat. His ribs screamed with each breath. But he was alive, which was unexpected. A woman sat in the chair beside his bed, reading something on a tablet. She had dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, olive skin, and an expression of focused concentration. She wore scrubs and a badge that identified her as Shirley Hammond, RN. As if sensing his consciousness, she looked up. Her eyes were brown, intelligent, and completely unimpressed by whatever she saw when she looked at him. "Welcome back," she said. Her voice was professional, but carried an undertone of warmth that didn't feel manufactured. "You've been out for a while. Do you know where you are?" Jacob tried to speak, but his throat was raw. She immediately reached for a cup of water with a straw, holding it so he could drink. The small kindness felt foreign, uncomfortable. "Hospital," he managed after swallowing. "Good," she said. "Do you know your name?" "Jacob Morris." "Also good. Do you remember what happened?" Images flashed. The dashboard lights. The locked steering wheel. The guardrail approaching too fast. My car malfunctioned. The system failed. I crashed. Your Tesla's entire electrical system shut down catastrophically while you were driving on a mountain road, Shirley said, setting down the water cup. According to the police report, it's being investigated as a possible software failure. You're lucky to be alive, Mr. Morris. Very lucky. Jacob tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through his ribs so sharply he gasped. Shirley was there instantly, hands firm but gentle, guiding him back down. 3 broken ribs, she explained. Movement is going to be extremely difficult for a while. You also have a significant concussion, which means we're keeping you here for observation. No arguments, no offering to pay for early release, no sending your lawyers to negotiate. You stay until I say you're medically ready to leave. Understood. There was something refreshing about her directness. No deference to his wealth. No recognition of his status. Just a medical professional stating facts and expecting compliance. How long? He asked. Minimum 2 weeks here, then another 4 to 6 weeks of restricted activity and monitored home care, Shirley replied. You'll need someone with you during recovery. Your attorney mentioned arranging private nursing when he visited yesterday. No, Jacob said immediately. The thought of a stranger in his space, in his carefully controlled environment, made his chest tight with something beyond physical pain. I'll be fine alone. Shirley gave him a look that suggested she'd heard this particular brand of stubbornness approximately 10,000 times before and had exactly 0 patience for it. Mr. Morris, she said, her tone shifting to something that brooked no argument. You cannot lift your head without wanting to scream. You have 3 broken ribs, a concussion that requires round-the-clock monitoring for at least another week, and you'll be on pain medication that significantly affects judgment and motor control. You physically cannot be alone. This isn't about pride or preference. It's about basic survival. I've survived alone for years, Jacob muttered, then immediately wondered why he'd said that out loud. The medication was stripping away his usual filters. Shirley paused in the act of adjusting his IV drip. Her eyes met his with unexpected understanding, and for a moment, something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or the kind of knowing that comes from experience rather than observation, Surviving isn't the same as living, Mr. Morris, she said quietly. But that's a conversation for when you don't have a brain injury. For now, let's focus on keeping you alive long enough to contemplate the difference. She turned back to her work, documenting something on the tablet, and Jacob found himself staring at her. When was the last time someone had spoken to him like that? Like he was a person rather than a bank account. Like his protests were understandable, but irrelevant. Like she saw through the walls he'd spent 15 years building, and found them neither impressive nor intimidating. Your attorney is coming back this evening, Shirley continued without looking up. Richard Chen. He seems very concerned about the private nursing arrangements. I suggest you have a real conversation with him about what you need, because, Mr. Morris, you need help. Whether you want to admit that or not, why do you care? Jacob asked. The question came out more confrontational than he'd intended, but he genuinely wanted to know. I'm just another patient. Why does it matter to you whether I accept help? Shirley finally looked up from the tablet. She studied him for a long moment, and Jacob had the unsettling feeling of being truly seen, evaluated not for his net worth but for something more fundamental. Because I've worked in emergency medicine for 10 years, she said, and I've learned to recognize the difference between patients who can't ask for help and patients who've convinced themselves they don't deserve it. You're the latter. And people like you, Mr. Morris, you survive your injuries just fine. Perfect physical recovery. Then you go home to whatever isolated existence you came from, and you die anyway. Just slower, lonelier. I'd prefer you actually lived instead. The words hit harder than the crash had. Jacob opened his mouth to respond, to deflect, to rebuild the wall she'd just casually demolished. But before he could speak, another nurse appeared in the doorway. Shirley, we need you in Bay 1. Multi-car accident, 3 incoming. Shirley stood immediately, all business. I'll check on you in a few hours, she told Jacob. Think about what I said, and drink more water. Hydration helps with the headache. She was gone before he could respond, leaving him alone with the fluorescent lights and the truth he'd been avoiding. When the paramedics had pulled him from the wreckage, they'd found no emergency contacts in his phone beyond his attorney. No family to notify, no friends waiting for news, no one who'd have noticed his absence until a missed board meeting made it professionally relevant. He'd survived the crash. But Shirley was right. He'd been dying long before his car went off the road. Before we continue with this story that's about to transform 2 lives in ways neither could predict, I need to speak directly to you for just a moment. This isn't just a story about a billionaire and a nurse. This is about the walls we build to protect ourselves that eventually become prisons. About choosing safety over connection until we forget what connection even feels like. About surviving versus living and how easy it is to confuse the two. If you've ever felt alone in a crowded room, if you've ever chosen isolation because it felt safer than risking rejection, if you've ever wondered whether you're even capable of genuine connection anymore, this story is for you. Hit that like button right now. Share this with someone who needs to know that it's never too late to choose differently, to tear down the walls, to learn how to live instead of just survive. And subscribe to Mr. Dawson's Stories, because this is what we do here. We tell the truth about what it costs to close your heart and what it takes to open it again. Now, back to this hospital room, where Jacob Morris is about to discover that the thing he fears most, being truly seen, might be exactly what he needs. Over the next 3 days, Jacob discovered that Shirley Hammond was impossible to intimidate, impress, or dismiss. She rotated through shifts, so he didn't see her constantly. But when she was on duty, she treated him exactly like she treated every other patient, with competent care that somehow managed to be both thoroughly professional and genuinely kind. She didn't ask about his company or his wealth. She asked about his pain levels, his sleep quality, whether he was experiencing headaches or dizziness or any of the 100 other symptoms that could indicate complications. She also talked to him like he was a person rather than a diagnosis or a bank account. At 2 a.m. on his 3rd night, when concussion protocol required another round of vital checks, she found him awake, staring at the ceiling. "Can't sleep?" she asked, wrapping the blood pressure cuff around his arm. "Too much sleeping already," Jacob replied. 43 hours apparently used up my quota. Shirley smiled slightly as she watched the numbers on the monitor. "Your blood pressure is good. Heart rate a little elevated, but that's normal for someone who's been through trauma. The insomnia will pass once your brain finishes processing what happened. Processing that I almost died. Processing that you're still alive," she corrected. "There's a difference. The brain has to recalibrate. You expected to die, accepted it, and then survived anyway. That's disorienting on a neurological level. She removed the cuff and made notes on her tablet. Jacob watched her work, struck by the efficiency of her movements, the quiet competence. "What are you reading?" he asked, noticing the book tucked into her scrubs pocket. Shirley pulled it out. Mystery thriller. Corporate espionage, murder, conspiracy. The medical details are completely inaccurate, which drives me crazy, but the plot is engaging. What's inaccurate about it? She launched into an explanation of how the author had completely misunderstood toxicology timelines and symptom presentation. Jacob found himself genuinely interested, asking questions, engaging in a conversation that had nothing to do with business or money or anything that usually defined his interactions. "You're different than the other nurses," he observed, when she finished her explanation. "Different how?" Shirley asked, tucking the book back into her pocket. "You're not afraid of me. Most people are either intimidated by money or trying to figure out how to get close to it. You treat me like I'm just another patient." "You are just another patient," Shirley replied simply. "A patient with expensive insurance and probably a very nice watch under all those bandages, sure. But in this room, you're a man with broken ribs and a brain injury who needs medical care. Your bank account doesn't change those facts. It changes everything everywhere else." Shirley paused at the door, turning back to look at him. "Then maybe everywhere else is the problem, not you." The observation landed somewhere deep in Jacob's chest, in a place he'd stopped examining years ago. On the fourth day, Richard Chen arrived with a folder of documents requiring signatures and a list of private nursing agencies that could provide 24/7 care during Jacob's recovery. "I don't need private nursing," Jacob said for the third time in as many days. Richard, who'd been Jacob's attorney for 8 years and was probably the closest thing Jacob had to a friend, which was a depressing thought, sighed with barely concealed frustration. "The hospital says you do," he countered. "And frankly, Jacob, you can't even get out of bed without help. Stop being stubborn and accept reality." "What's the objection to home nursing?" Shirley asked, appearing in the doorway with evening medications. "If it's about privacy, these agencies are very discreet. They sign NDAs. Your nurse wouldn't be calling press or taking photos of your vulnerable moments to sell to tabloids." "It's not about privacy," Jacob said, then stopped. How did he explain the real reason? That he'd spent 15 years building a life of complete solitude. That the thought of someone in his space felt like an invasion he couldn't tolerate. That he'd structured his entire existence around not needing anyone for anything, and accepting help now felt like admitting defeat. "It's about control," Shirley said quietly, understanding flickering across her face. "You've built a life where you control every variable, where you don't depend on anyone, where needing help feels like weakness." Jacob stared at her, feeling uncomfortably seen. "Yes, that must be exhausting," she observed. Not with pity, just simple statement of fact. Maintaining that level of control all the time, never letting anyone close enough to help or hurt you. Never trusting anyone. Never being vulnerable. That's exhausting, isn't it? It's worked fine for 15 years. Has it? Shirley asked, moving closer to administer his medication. Or have you just gotten very good at surviving instead of living? There's a difference, Mr. Morris, and I think you know that. She handed him the small cup of pills and the water. Jacob took them, maintaining eye contact, trying to figure out how this nurse kept dismantling his defenses with simple observations. After Richard left, frustrated but resigned to Jacob's stubbornness about the nursing situation, Shirley returned to finish her evening rounds. She moved around the room with practiced efficiency, checking monitors, adjusting his 4, documenting everything on her tablet. "Can I ask you something?" she said as she worked. "Not as your nurse, just as someone curious." "What happened?" "What do you mean? 15 years ago you said, whatever happened that made you decide isolation was preferable to connection. What was it?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment. The medication was making him looser, more willing to speak truths he usually kept locked away. And there was something about Shirley, about the way she asked without demanding, that made him want to answer. "I built my first company at 23, he finally said. Revolutionary software that changed mobile computing. I was engaged to someone I'd known since college. Rachel. We were planning a life together. Marriage, family, the whole traditional path." He paused, the memory still sharp despite the years. 6 months before the wedding, she sat me down and explained that she'd been in love with my business partner David for over a year, that they'd been trying to resist it, trying to be honorable, but they couldn't anymore, that she was sorry, but she wanted to be with him, needed to be with him. Shirley had stopped working, giving him her full attention. That's devastating. The worst part wasn't losing her, Jacob continued, surprising himself with the honesty. It was realizing I'd never really had her. That the whole time I thought we were building something real, planning a future, she was imagining a life with someone else. That I'd completely failed to see the truth right in front of me. I felt like an idiot, blind and stupid and completely fooled. So you decided never to let anyone close enough to fool you again, Shirley finished. I decided to focus on things I could control, Jacob said. Business, technology, systems that followed logical rules and didn't pretend to feel things they didn't. I was good at it. Built Morris Innovations into a multi-billion-dollar company. Proved I didn't need partnership or connection to succeed. You proved you could survive alone, Shirley corrected gently. But Mr. Morris, Jacob, is that really the same as succeeding? The question haunted him that night as he lay awake despite the pain medication, his ribs aching and his head pounding. He'd spent 15 years certain that his isolation was strength, that his independence was achievement. But lying here, dependent on strangers for basic functions, with no one to call who'd care beyond professional obligation, it didn't feel like strength. It felt like exactly what Shirley had said. Survival masquerading as success. On the 7th day, Jacob was arguing with the hospital administrator about discharge protocols when Shirley arrived for her shift. I can hire the best medical equipment and private nursing available, Jacob was saying, his voice tight with frustration that barely masked desperation. There's no reason I need to stay here another week. Your concussion requires continued monitoring, the administrator replied firmly. And you still cannot walk without assistance. Hospital policy clearly states. I'll do it, Shirley interrupted from the doorway. Both men turned to look at her. Jacob felt something shift in his chest, hope and fear mixing into something unidentifiable. Excuse me? The administrator said. I'll provide the home nursing care, Shirley repeated, walking into the room with the confidence of someone who'd just made an impulsive decision and was committed to seeing it through. I have 2 weeks of vacation time saved up, and I'm fully certified for home health care. Mr. Morris clearly cannot tolerate the idea of a stranger in his space, but he seems to tolerate me well enough. So, I'll do it. 2 weeks of round-the-clock care at his home, then we reassess based on his recovery progress. You don't do private nursing, Jacob said. He'd learned that from conversations with other nurses. Shirley worked exclusively in the ER, had for years, turned down private opportunities regularly. I do now, Shirley said calmly, though something in her eyes suggested this was as surprising to her as it was to everyone else. Why would you do that? Jacob asked carefully. Because he needed to understand, needed to know if this was pity or something else entirely. Shirley met his gaze directly. Because everyone deserves someone who shows up, especially when they can't do it for themselves. And because I have a strong feeling that if I send you home alone, you'll ignore every medical protocol, push yourself too hard, and end up back here in worse condition. Consider it professional obligation to ensure my patient recovers properly. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Her professional obligation ended at the hospital doors. This was something else, a choice she was making for reasons she probably hadn't fully examined, driven by recognition of someone who'd mastered survival but forgotten how to live. The administrator looked between them, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't fully understand, but also clearly relieved to have the situation resolved. I'll need to see your home health certification and prepare the discharge paperwork. After he left, Shirley turned to Jacob. I need to be clear about something. This is medical care, not friendship, not therapy, not whatever else you might be thinking. You follow my instructions exactly. You don't push boundaries. You don't try to work through your concussion. You rest, you heal, and you let me do my job. Agreed? Agreed, Jacob said. Then, quieter, thank you. Don't thank me yet, Shirley replied. You haven't experienced my home care protocols. I'm significantly less tolerant of stubbornness outside the hospital. But she smiled slightly as she said it, and Jacob felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years. Not attraction exactly, though she was beautiful. Not gratitude, though he was grateful. Something simpler and more profound. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to be alone anymore. Jacob's house was everything Shirley expected, and somehow still surprised her. They arrived just after noon on a crisp autumn day, the mountains surrounding Boulder painted in gold and orange. The house sat on 10 acres of carefully maintained property, accessible only by a private road that wound through aspens and pines. It was an architectural masterpiece. all glass and clean lines and stunning views. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the mountain vistas from every angle. The design was minimalist but clearly expensive, every element chosen for aesthetic precision. And it felt completely empty. Not empty of furniture. The interior was impeccably furnished with pieces that probably cost more than Shirley made in a year, but empty of life, empty of personality, empty of any indication that a human actually lived here, rather than just occasionally occupied the space between work obligations. There were no photographs, no personal items, no books or magazines, no clutter, nothing out of place. It looked like a showroom, beautiful and sterile and profoundly sad. "Guest room is down that hall," Jacob said, moving slowly with the walker the hospital had insisted on. "Second door on the left. It has its own bathroom. Help yourself to anything in the kitchen." Shirley wheeled her suitcase down the indicated hallway, noting the pristine condition of everything. Too clean, too ordered. The home of someone who'd removed all traces of actually living in favor of mere existing. The guest room was beautiful. King-size bed with hotel-quality linens. Tasteful artwork that looked expensive and impersonal. An ensuite bathroom with marble counters and fixtures that probably cost more than her car. She unpacked quickly, then did something she'd planned on the drive over. She pulled out one of her terrible paintings, the ones she created in her community art class, purely for the joy of it despite having absolutely no talent. This one was a lopsided sunflower in colors that didn't quite work together. It was objectively bad art, and she loved it completely. She hung it on the guest room wall, the first personal object in this sterile space. When she returned to the main living area, she found Jacob attempting to work. He'd set up a laptop on the dining table, despite barely being able to sit upright, and he was squinting at the screen with obvious pain. "Absolutely not," Shirley said, walking over and closing the laptop. "I have emails," Jacob protested. "Projects that need oversight, decisions that your executive team can handle," Shirley interrupted. "Concussion protocol means limiting screen time and cognitive demands. You can have your technology back in controlled increments once your brain is actually healed. But right now, your only job is to rest." "I can't just stop working for 2 weeks," Jacob argued, reaching for the laptop. Shirley moved it out of reach. "Yes, you can. You have people you pay very well to handle day-to-day operations. Delegate. That's what executives do, isn't it? Trust your team to manage while you recover. I don't trust anyone to manage critical decisions." "I know," Shirley said quietly. "That's part of your problem." She took the laptop to her room along with his phone and returned to find him glaring at her with as much anger as someone on pain medication could muster. "This is my house," he said. "And I'm your nurse," she countered, "which means I have medical authority over your recovery. You want to file a complaint? Call your attorney." "Oh, wait. You can't. I have your phone." Despite the frustration, Jacob felt something like amusement. When was the last time someone had challenged him like this? Treated his authority as irrelevant? Prioritized his well-being over his preferences? "What am I supposed to do for 2 weeks without work?" he asked. "Live," Shirley suggested. "Read. Rest. Let your brain heal. Maybe figure out who you are when you're not defining yourself by productivity." "I don't know who that is." "Then maybe it's time to find out." The first few days were tense. Jacob clearly struggled with having someone in his space, even someone he'd come to trust in the hospital. He tried to maintain boundaries, closing doors, keeping to rigid schedules, maintaining the control that defined his existence. Shirley gently violated every boundary that interfered with his healing. She cooked meals that filled the house with smells it had probably never experienced, garlic and herbs and baking bread. She insisted they eat together because, as she pointed out, she had to eat anyway, and cooking for 2 was barely more effort than cooking for 1. Their first shared meal was awkward. They sat at opposite ends of the long dining table, eating in silence, both hyper-aware of the intimacy of the situation. "This is ridiculous," Shirley finally said. "We're eating dinner, not negotiating a hostage situation. Move down here where we can actually have a conversation." Jacob moved, settling into the chair adjacent to hers. "Better? Much. Now tell me something about yourself that has nothing to do with work." "There isn't anything," Jacob said. "Nothing? You have no interests, hobbies, activities you do purely because they bring you joy?" "I work. That's what I do." Shirley set down her fork and looked at him. "That's the saddest thing I've heard all week. And I work in emergency medicine, so I hear a lot of sad things." "Working isn't living, Jacob. Working is, well, It's work. Living is what happens in the spaces between obligations, when you're doing things that feed your soul rather than your bank account. What do you do for joy? He asked, genuinely curious about this woman who'd invaded his carefully controlled life and made it feel less empty. I read, she said, warming to the topic. Mystery novels, historical fiction, anything that takes me somewhere beyond hospital corridors and medical charts. I hike in the mountains on my days off. I have a nephew I spoil completely inappropriately with science kits and building sets because I love watching him figure things out. I volunteer at a community garden where we grow vegetables for the food bank. I take a painting class even though I have absolutely no talent, and I create objectively terrible art that makes me happy anyway. I live, Jacob. I do things that have no productivity value and no measurable outcome beyond the fact that they make me feel human. The catalog of her life felt like an indictment of his own. When was the last time he'd done anything purely for joy? When had his existence become so narrowed that work was the only thing that gave him purpose? I used to play piano, Jacob heard himself say. The memory surfaced from somewhere deep. In college. I wasn't great, but I enjoyed it. The mathematical precision of music, the way patterns created emotion. What happened to that? I got busy. Built a company. Told myself I'd get back to it eventually. He paused. That was 17 years ago. Shirley was quiet for a moment, then said gently, "It's not too late, you know, to do things that make you human again, to let yourself have interests beyond profit margins and stock prices, to actually live instead of just accumulate." "Maybe it is too late," Jacob said. "Maybe I've forgotten how." "Then you learn," Shirley replied. "The same way you learn to build a company from nothing to write code that changed technology. You learn by trying." That night, unable to sleep, Jacob found himself thinking about the piano gathering dust in his Denver penthouse. A relic of a version of himself he'd abandoned in pursuit of invulnerability. A reminder that he'd once been capable of doing things purely for joy. Maybe Shirley was right. Maybe it wasn't too late to remember how. The days developed a rhythm. Shirley woke early, checked his vitals, administered medications, prepared breakfast. Jacob protested less each day, slowly accepting that resistance was futile and also surprisingly unnecessary. She was easy to be around. She read in the living room while he rested, her presence a soft intrusion into his solitude rather than an invasion. She asked questions about his life that no one had asked in years, not about his company or his wealth, but about him, his interests, his thoughts, what he'd wanted to be before he became who he was. On the 5th day, during a supervised walk through the house for physical therapy, Jacob paused by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the mountain vista. "I bought this house because of this view," he said quietly. "The isolation, the distance from the city, the feeling of being completely alone with the mountains and sky. I thought it was peace." Shirley stood beside him, following his gaze to the aspens turning gold in the autumn sun. "And now? Now I think maybe it was just another way to avoid connection. If you live far enough from everyone, you never have to risk letting them close enough to hurt you." "That's a pretty sophisticated piece of self-awareness for someone with a concussion," Shirley observed. Jacob turned to look at her. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." Shirley smiled, but it was tinged with old pain. "I was engaged once too. To a doctor I met in nursing school, Michael. We built our whole lives around each other. Career plans, names for future kids, the house we'd buy. Then I caught him with another nurse from his hospital. Not a one-time mistake. A 6-month affair he'd been hiding while still planning our wedding, still talking about our future like it was real. "I'm sorry," Jacob said quietly. "I survived it," Shirley replied. "Threw myself into work, built walls, decided I was better off alone. Spent 5 years proving I didn't need anyone." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "And I was fine, functional, successful, perfectly capable of surviving independently. But I wasn't happy, Jacob. I was just less unhappy than I'd been when betrayed. There's a significant difference." "What changed?" "My nephew was born. My sister had complications, and I ended up staying with them for 2 months, helping with the baby, being part of their messy family chaos. And I realized I'd spent 5 years so focused on not hurting that I'd forgotten how to feel anything else. So I made a choice to start letting people in again. Carefully, slowly, with boundaries and caution. But I chose connection over safety. And yes, sometimes people disappoint me. Sometimes I get hurt. But I'm living now, not just surviving. And that's worth the risk." "How did you know you were ready?" Jacob asked. To let people care about you again? I didn't, Shirley admitted. I just knew I was tired of being alone. The rest I had to learn by doing, by risking rejection and disappointment, and all the things I'd been avoiding. It's terrifying, honestly. Every time I let someone close, there's this voice in my head saying I'm being foolish, that I'll get hurt again, that I should retreat back behind my walls where it's safe. But the alternative, spending my life in perfect safety and complete isolation, that started feeling like a different kind of death. Jacob absorbed this, feeling something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with his healing ribs. What if I don't know how anymore? To let people in, to trust, to be anything other than alone. Then you learn, Shirley said again, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one risk at a time. They stood there in the fading afternoon light, two people who'd chosen isolation after betrayal, and Jacob felt the first crack in walls he'd spent 15 years building. Maybe learning was possible. Maybe change wasn't too late. Maybe, just maybe, surviving didn't have to be the best he could hope for. That evening, Jacob made a decision that would have been unthinkable 3 weeks earlier. After dinner, as Shirley was cleaning up the kitchen, he cleared his throat nervously. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Shirley turned from the sink, drying her hands on a towel. "Of course. Your 2 weeks are almost up. The medical necessity part, I mean. My ribs are healing well. The concussion symptoms have decreased significantly. By your own assessment yesterday, I'm progressing faster than expected." "That's all true," Shirley said carefully, sensing where this was going. Jacob took a breath, which still hurt but was manageable. "I know I can't pay you nursing rates if you're not actually providing medical care. And I know you need to get back to your life, your job, your nephew. But I was wondering if, maybe, you might consider staying. Not as my nurse, just as..." He struggled to find words that didn't sound desperate or pathetic. "As someone who's here, a friend, maybe. If that's something you'd want." The vulnerability in his voice was painful to hear. This man who commanded boardrooms and made billion-dollar decisions was stumbling over an invitation to friendship, like a teenager asking someone to prom. Shirley set down the towel and moved closer. "Jacob, are you asking me to stay as a friend, or are you asking me to stay because you're afraid of being alone again?" "Both," he admitted. "Probably both. I don't know how to have friends. I haven't in 15 years. I don't know what that looks like, or how to do it right. But these past 2 weeks, having you here, talking with you, learning from you, it's been the first time in longer than I can remember that this house felt like something other than an expensive storage unit for my existence. And I don't want that to end. I don't want to go back to being alone." Shirley studied him for a long moment. "I'm not asking for payment," Jacob said quickly. "I know that would make it weird, make it transactional. I'm just asking if you'd want to stay. As yourself. To see if we can figure out what friendship looks like for two people who've both forgotten how to do it." "I'm supposed to go back to work next week," Shirley said. "I know, and if you want to, you should. I'm not trying to manipulate you or make you feel obligated. I'm asking, that's all." Shirley crossed her arms, thinking, what would this look like? Me staying here, in your guest room, while we what? Have dinner and watch movies and pretend we're normal people with normal friendships? "Yes," Jacob said. "Exactly that. Is that so impossible?" "It's unusual," Shirley replied. "But then again, nothing about this situation has been usual from the start." She was quiet for another moment, and Jacob felt his heart rate increase with each second of silence. When had someone else's answer mattered this much? "I have vacation time," Shirley finally said. "Another 2 weeks I was going to let expire because I never take time off. And I have to admit, spending those 2 weeks hiking alone versus staying here and figuring out what friendship looks like with a billionaire who air pianos Beethoven, the second option is more interesting." "Wait, when did you see me air piano Beethoven?" Jacob asked. "Last Tuesday. You thought I was in my room, but I was coming back from the kitchen. You were standing by the window moving your fingers like you were playing something. It was either air piano or you were having a neurological episode, and I chose to interpret it generously." Despite the embarrassment, Jacob laughed. Actually laughed, the sound surprising both of them. "I was remembering a piece I used to play. Moonlight Sonata. My fingers remembered, even though I haven't touched a piano in 17 years. "That's beautiful," Shirley said softly. "Sad, but beautiful. Maybe you should get a piano." "Maybe I should," Jacob agreed. "Will you stay?" Shirley smiled. "Yes, I'll stay. But Jacob, Ground rules. I'm not your employee or your nurse anymore. I'm your friend, which means equal footing. You don't get to make all the decisions about meals or activities or how we spend time. We figure it out together. Agreed? Agreed. And if this gets weird, if either of us feels uncomfortable, we talk about it. No hiding, no pretending everything's fine when it's not. Agreed. And you have to actually try. At friendship, at opening up, at being vulnerable. No retreating behind work or walls or billionaire aloofness when things get too real. Jacob hesitated, then nodded. Agreed. Though I should warn you, I'm probably going to be terrible at this. Good thing I'm patient, Shirley said, and professionally trained in dealing with difficult patients. I'm not your patient anymore, Jacob reminded her. No, she agreed. You're my friend, and that's somehow more terrifying and more wonderful than I expected. The second 2 weeks transformed into something neither of them had anticipated. With the medical necessity gone, their relationship shifted from caregiver and patient to something more complicated and infinitely more genuine. Shirley returned to cooking, but now Jacob helped. Limited mobility and all, he stood at the counter chopping vegetables under her supervision, following recipes, learning that he actually enjoyed the meditative process of preparing food. This is nice, he said one evening while dicing onions for pasta sauce. You're smiling at onions, Shirley observed. That's how starved for normal human activities you've been. Onions are making you happy. They're very uniform onions, Jacob defended. Look at the consistency of these pieces. You're a weirdo, she said affectionately. But yes, they're very uniform. Good job. They established routines. Morning coffee on the deck when weather permitted, watching the sun rise over the mountains. Afternoon walks through the property as Jacob's strength returned, discussing everything from philosophy to terrible reality TV they both pretended not to enjoy. Evening meals followed by movies or reading in comfortable silence. Shirley taught him about the things she loved. She brought him to the community garden where she volunteered, introducing him to people who had no idea who he was and didn't care. He spent a Saturday morning pulling weeds and learning about heirloom tomatoes from a 70-year-old woman named Margaret, who treated him exactly like everyone else. This is the best day I've had in years, Jacob told Shirley as they drove home, dirt under his fingernails and his back aching pleasantly from physical labor. You spent 4 hours doing manual labor for free, Shirley pointed out. No profit, no productivity metrics, no measurable outcome beyond some tomatoes you'll never eat because they're going to the food bank. Exactly, Jacob said, and it was perfect. One evening, Shirley pulled up music on her phone and insisted Jacob demonstrate his piano skills despite the lack of an actual piano. Air piano, she declared. Show me what you remember from all those years ago. This is ridiculous, Jacob protested. Probably. Do it anyway. He felt absurd, but he did it. Standing in his living room, fingers moving through remembered pieces, muscle memory intact despite 17 years of neglect. Shirley watched with delight, occasionally requesting songs she recognized, applauding his invisible performances with genuine enthusiasm. You should play again, she said, when he finished an imaginary rendition of Claire de Lune. Really play, not just air piano for my entertainment. Maybe I will, Jacob replied, and meant it. They talked late into the nights, conversations that ranged from profound to ridiculous. Jacob told her about the early days of his company, the excitement and terror of building something from nothing. Shirley shared stories from the emergency room, the heartbreaking and hilarious moments that came with treating humanity at its most vulnerable. Tell me about your nephew, Jacob said one night. Shirley's face lit up. His name is Danny. He's 7, and he's obsessed with how things work. Not just interested, obsessed. He takes apart every toy to understand the mechanisms. He asks questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? How do airplanes stay up? What makes magnets work? His parents are going crazy trying to keep up with his curiosity. He sounds brilliant. He is, and exhausting. But watching him figure things out, seeing that moment when understanding clicks into place, it's magic. I want to encourage that, to make sure he never loses that curiosity. You'd be a good mother, Jacob said, then immediately worried he'd overstepped. But Shirley just smiled sadly. Maybe someday. Michael and I were planning to start trying right after the wedding. When that fell apart, I put the whole idea away. Decided I didn't need that kind of life. But lately, watching Danny grow up, I wonder if I gave up on something important because one man made it feel impossible. It's not too late, Jacob said. You're what, 32? 33, And I know it's not too late biologically. It's just, I'd need to find someone first. Someone who wants that life. Someone I can trust not to destroy me again. You'll find them, Jacob said, with surprising certainty. Someone worthy of you. Someone who sees how extraordinary you are, and doesn't take that for granted. Shirley looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. What about you? Did you want children? Before everything fell apart with Rachel? Yes, Jacob admitted. 2 or 3. I had this whole vision of teaching them to code, helping with science projects, being the kind of father who was present and engaged. Then Rachel left, and I decided none of that was for me. Told myself I wasn't father material, that I was better off alone. Easier to believe that than to admit I was just afraid of risking it again. You'd be a good father too, Shirley said quietly. You're patient, intelligent, and underneath all that isolation, you actually care about people. You just forgot how to show it. Maybe we both gave up too much, Jacob said. Let one betrayal define our entire futures. Maybe. Or maybe we're learning to want those things again. Together. The word hung in the air between them. Together. It held possibility and danger in equal measure. 2 weeks became 3. Shirley called the hospital and requested an extended leave of absence citing personal reasons. Her supervisor, who'd been begging her to actually use her vacation time for years, approved immediately. Jacob restructured his work schedule, taking meetings remotely but limiting them to mornings only. He delegated responsibilities he'd previously considered non-negotiable, discovering that his executive team was more than capable when actually given authority. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the house transformed. Shirley's terrible paintings appeared on walls throughout the main living area. Books accumulated on side tables. The kitchen started to smell like cooking instead of sterility. Photographs appeared for the first time in years. Shirley printing and framing pictures from their community garden days, their mountain walks, a candid shot of Jacob laughing at something Danny had said during a video call. The house was becoming a home. On a Friday evening, 3 weeks after Shirley was supposed to have left, Jacob's phone rang. It was Richard Chen, calling with updates that required his attention. Jacob took the call in his office while Shirley read in the living room. The conversation lasted 40 minutes, covering acquisition opportunities, partnership negotiations, and strategic decisions that would normally have consumed his entire focus. But for the first time in 15 years, Jacob found himself resenting the interruption. Not because the work was uninteresting or unimportant, but because it was taking time away from Shirley, from the evening they'd planned, from the life he was building that had nothing to do with profit margins and everything to do with actual living. The realization shocked him. Work had always been his refuge, his purpose, the thing that filled the emptiness. When had that shifted? When had a quiet evening with someone else become more valuable than business? After the call, he found Shirley on the deck, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. The autumn air was cool but not cold, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of winter. He stood beside her in silence for a moment, both of them watching the light fade. "Can I ask you something?" Jacob finally said. "Not about medicine or my recovery, about you." "That depends on the question," Shirley replied. "Are you happy? Beyond being here, beyond this specific situation, in your life, generally, are you happy?" The question caught her off guard. She considered it carefully before answering. "I'm content. I have work that matters, people I care about, a life I've built from scratch after everything fell apart. That's more than a lot of people get." "Content isn't happy," Jacob observed. "Maybe not," Shirley acknowledged. "But it's stable. And after years of chaos and heartbreak, I'll take stable over the risk of chasing happiness." "What if you didn't have to choose? What if you could have both?" Shirley turned to look at him. "What are you really asking, Jacob?" He took a breath, gathering courage. "I've been thinking about something you said, about how I resented work interrupting my life. That's never happened before. Work was my life. But tonight, on that call with Richard, all I could think about was that I was missing time with you. That business that used to be everything felt like an obligation keeping me from something more important. That's growth," Shirley said softly. "That's what choosing to live instead of just survive looks like. But it's more than that," Jacob continued. "These past 3 weeks, with you here, learning to be human again, it's not just about having someone around. It's about having you, specifically. The way you challenge me, the way you see through my defenses, the way you make everything feel possible instead of pointless." He paused, then pushed forward before fear could stop him. "Why did you really offer to do home nursing?" The real reason, not the professional obligation excuse. Shirley was quiet for a long moment. The sunset continued its slow fade, the world shifting from gold to purple to the deep blue of evening. Because when I looked at you in that hospital bed, she finally said, alone and trying so hard to convince everyone, including yourself, that you preferred it that way, I saw myself 5 years ago. And I thought maybe if I could help you find a way back to living instead of just surviving, it might mean those 5 years I wasted weren't completely pointless, that maybe I could save someone else from making my mistakes. You saved me, Jacob said quietly. Not from the accident, from everything else, from the isolation I'd convinced myself was strength, from confusing survival with success, from forgetting that humans are supposed to need each other. Shirley turned to face him fully, and in the fading light, he could see tears gathering in her eyes. Jacob, she started. I love you. He interrupted. The words escaped before he could second-guess them, before fear could reassert control. I don't know when it happened or how, and I'm probably doing this completely wrong because I haven't said those words to anyone in 15 years, but I love you. And I don't want you to leave when your vacation ends. I want you here, in this house that's never felt like a home until you were in it. I want to learn how to live instead of just survive, and I want to do it with you. The confession hung between them, raw and terrifying. Jacob's heart pounded so hard he thought his ribs might break again from the inside. Every instinct screamed at him to take it back, to rebuild the walls, to retreat to safety. But he didn't. He stood there, completely vulnerable, and waited. Shirley's tears spilled over, tracking down her cheeks in the twilight. For a moment that felt like an eternity, she said nothing. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, I love you too. Jacob felt something in his chest crack open, 15 years of ice melting in an instant. Even though you're stubborn and you work too much, and you air-pianoed Beethoven in your living room like a complete weirdo, Shirley continued, her voice breaking with emotion and laughter. I love you. I tried not to. Told myself this was just helping a patient, just friendship, just anything other than falling for someone who could hurt me. But somewhere between the hospital and here, between professional obligation and actual choice, I fell in love with you. Can I kiss you? Jacob asked. You better, Shirley replied. He moved closer, carefully because his ribs still protested sudden movements, and cupped her face in his hands. Her skin was soft, warm, real. He could feel her trembling, or maybe that was him, or maybe it was both of them terrified and brave in equal measure. The kiss was gentle, tentative, nothing like the passionate embraces in movies. It was the kiss of two people who'd forgotten how to be this vulnerable, who were learning together, who were choosing courage over safety. When they pulled apart, both were crying. This is terrifying, Shirley whispered. Absolutely terrifying, Jacob agreed. What if we mess this up? What if I'm not enough, or you realize this was just loneliness, or... Shirley, Jacob interrupted gently. We might mess this up. We probably will at some point, because we're both damaged and learning as we go. But I'd rather risk messing this up with you than spend another 15 years in perfect safety and complete isolation. Wouldn't you? Yes, she said. God help me, yes. They stood there on the deck as the last light faded from the sky, holding each other, two people who'd chosen isolation after betrayal now choosing connection despite fear. The mountains witnessed their transformation in silence, ancient and patient, as the first stars emerged overhead. Before we continue with what happens next in this journey that's about to test everything Jacob and Shirley think they know about love and risk, I need to speak to you again. We just witnessed something profound. Two people who'd spent years building walls, convincing themselves that isolation was strength, that needing no one made them powerful, just chose vulnerability, just risked everything for the possibility of genuine connection. If you're feeling this moment, if something about Jacob and Shirley's courage is resonating in that carefully guarded place in your heart, I need you to do something. Hit that like button right now, not for the algorithm, though that helps, but as a commitment to yourself that you're willing to risk connection too, that you're willing to choose living over surviving. Share this video with someone who needs permission to try again. That friend who's been alone too long. That family member who's built walls too high. That person in your life who thinks independence means never needing anyone. Send them this story. It might be exactly what they need to hear. And subscribe to Mr. Dawson's stories. Turn on those notifications, because we're building something here. A community of people who believe in messy, imperfect, courageous human connection, who understand that the scariest thing and the most essential thing are often the same. Join us. Drop a comment answering this question. What's one wall you need to tear down? Just one. Name it. Acknowledge it. That's the first step. Now let's see what happens when two people who've learned to survive alone try to build a life together. 6 months after that first kiss on the deck, Jacob Morris did something that shocked the technology world. He announced a major restructuring of Morris Innovations. Effective immediately, he was delegating day-to-day operations to his executive team. He would remain as CEO and chairman, focusing on long-term strategy and innovation, but he was stepping back from the 70-hour work weeks that had defined his professional life. The announcement included a personal statement, which was unprecedented. Jacob had never shared anything personal publicly. His life had been scrupulously private. His interviews focused solely on business. But this statement was different. I spent 15 years building a company while forgetting to build a life, he wrote. I measured success in revenue and market share while ignoring the fact that I was completely alone. Convinced myself that achievement could substitute for human connection, that independence was strength, that I didn't need anyone or anything beyond my work. I was wrong about all of it. Earlier this year, I survived a car accident that should have killed me. In the aftermath, I met someone who refused to let me return to the expensive loneliness I'd been calling success. She taught me the difference between surviving and living. She showed me that needing people isn't weakness, it's what makes us human. And she gave me permission to want more from life than just quarterly earnings reports. I'm restructuring my professional life to prioritize my personal life. Not because I'm less committed to Morris Innovations, but because I've learned that a company can thrive without a CEO who sacrifices everything else on the altar of productivity. In fact, I believe we'll be stronger with leadership that understands the value of balance, of connection, of actually living. I'm grateful to the woman who taught me this lesson. And I'm sharing this publicly because if my story can help even one person recognize that they're surviving instead of living, that isolation isn't strength, that it's never too late to choose differently, then it's worth the vulnerability. Success means nothing if you have no one to share it with. I know that now, and I'm choosing differently. The statement went viral within hours. Business analysts questioned his judgment. Competitors wondered if this signaled weakness in his leadership. But the overwhelming response came from ordinary people who saw themselves in his confession. The comments sections filled with personal stories. People sharing their own isolation, their own realization that achievement wasn't the same as fulfillment, their own gratitude for permission to prioritize connection over productivity. Shirley read the statement from her laptop in what had become their living room. She'd moved in officially 2 months earlier, transforming the guest room into an art studio where she created terrible paintings with increasing joy. You didn't have to do this, she said, when Jacob came to find her. The public statement. Exposing yourself like this. I wanted to, Jacob replied, sitting beside her on the couch. If my story helps someone, if it reaches even one person living like I was, it's worth it. Besides, it's true. Every word. You did save my life, and I'm not ashamed of that anymore. I'm grateful. The media requests came flooding in. Interview opportunities, profile pieces, speaking engagements. Jacob accepted a select few, always with the same message. Connection matters more than achievement. Living matters more than surviving. It's never too late to choose differently. He redirected attention from his romance to the universal truth. This wasn't about a billionaire's love story. It was about the human need for connection, the danger of isolation, the possibility of transformation, and he put his money where his statement was. He established the Morris Foundation for Human Connection, committing substantial resources to fund counseling for isolated individuals, community programs that built relationships, initiatives that helped people move from surviving to living. Shirley joined the board of directors, bringing her medical perspective and her understanding of what isolation did to people. Together, they built something that mattered beyond profit, beyond legacy, beyond anything Jacob had created in his 15 years of solitary achievement. Life settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable. Jacob worked, but on a human schedule. Mornings in his office, afternoons reserved for living. Shirley returned to hospital work part-time, 3 shifts a week instead of the exhausting full-time schedule she'd maintained for years. They had dinner together every evening, a non-negotiable commitment. They hiked on weekends, exploring trails throughout Colorado. They visited Shirley's sister regularly, and Jacob became Uncle Jacob to Danny, teaching him coding basics and funding an entire STEM program at his school. Jacob showed up to Danny's school for career day and talked about technology and engineering with 7-year-olds who had no idea he was a billionaire and didn't care. They just cared that he took their questions seriously and made complicated things understandable. "This is the best part of my week," Jacob told Shirley after one of these sessions. "Better than any board meeting or acquisition or product launch. Watching kids get excited about learning, being part of that curiosity. Why did I wait so long to experience this?" "Because you thought achievement was enough," Shirley replied. "But you know better now. They didn't rush into traditional milestones. No quick engagement or wedding. Both were intentional about not repeating past mistakes, about building a foundation before building a future. They'd each been burned by promises that proved empty, and they wanted to be sure. But they were building towards something. Everyone could see it. One evening, 9 months after Jacob's public statement, they sat together at the piano that had arrived 3 weeks earlier. A beautiful grand piano positioned by the mountain view windows, filling the space that had been empty for so long. Jacob's fingers moved over the keys, stumbling through pieces he'd once played flawlessly. 17 years was a long time to be away from an instrument. But slowly, with patient practice, the music was coming back. Shirley sat beside him on the bench, her presence patient and encouraging. She didn't know how to play, but she loved watching him rediscover this part of himself. Loved seeing the concentration on his face, the small smile when he got a passage right, the frustrated laugh when his fingers betrayed him. "This is what living feels like," Jacob said, pausing between pieces. "Not the piano specifically, though I love this, but this whole thing, doing something imperfect purely because it brings joy, having someone who cares enough to sit through my stumbling practice sessions, building a life that's about more than just achievement and acquisition." "Welcome back to the human race," Shirley replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We're messy and complicated, but we're real. And we're so much better together than alone." Jacob turned to look at her, setting his hands still on the silent keys. "I want to spend my life with you. Not just now, not just until this feeling fades. Forever. Will you marry me?" Shirley lifted her head, eyes wide. "You don't have a ring." "I have a piano," Jacob said, "and a house that's finally a home, and a life that's finally worth living. I can get a ring if you want one, but Shirley, I don't need grand gestures or perfect moments. I just need you. So will you marry me?" Tears gathered in Shirley's eyes, the good kind, the kind that came from joy instead of pain. "You're doing this all wrong," she said, laughing and crying simultaneously. "You're supposed to plan it, make it special, not just blurt it out during piano practice. Is that a no?" "That's a yes, you ridiculous man. That's absolutely a yes." Jacob pulled her close, careful even now of ribs that had long since healed but had taught him the value of gentleness. They sat there at the piano, holding each other, both crying and laughing, both terrified and brave and choosing each other anyway. "Really?" Jacob asked, pulling back to see her face. "You're sure?" "I'm terrified," Shirley admitted. "Because what if this doesn't work? What if we're both too damaged? What if—" "We choose each other anyway," Jacob interrupted. "Every day. Especially on the hard days. That's what this means. Not that we'll be perfect, but that we'll keep choosing. Even when it's difficult, even when we mess up, we keep choosing." "Then yes," Shirley said, "I choose you. Today and tomorrow and all the days after. Yes." The engagement was announced quietly, just a simple statement shared with close friends and family. No media circus, no public spectacle. This was theirs, private and precious and real. They planned a small wedding for the following spring. Intimate gathering, 30 people maximum, held at the mountain house with views of the aspens that would be turning green after the long winter. Shirley's sister cried when she heard. "I thought you'd given up on this," she said. "After Michael, you were so certain you'd never try again." "I had given up," Shirley replied. "But then I met someone who reminded me that one person's failure to see my worth didn't define my worthiness, and I decided to be brave enough to try again." Jacob told Richard Chen over lunch at a quiet restaurant in Boulder. His attorney, who'd been the only person in Jacob's life for so many years, looked genuinely happy for the first time since Jacob had known him. "I never thought I'd see this," Richard admitted. "You actually smiling, living instead of just existing, building a life that includes other people. Honestly, Jacob, I was worried about you for years, watching you disappear into work, cut off every connection. I thought the accident might be the end, but instead it was the beginning. Shirley saved my life," Jacob said simply, "and I'm going to spend the rest of mine being worthy of that gift." The months between engagement and wedding were filled with planning and living. They argued about flowers and catering, and whether to hire a photographer or just let guests take photos. They disagreed about guest lists and seating arrangements and 1,000 small details that didn't really matter. But they also laughed, cooked together, hiked through winter snow, attended Danny's science fair where he built a working model of a suspension bridge and explained load distribution with serious 7-year-old authority, volunteered at the community garden, preparing beds for spring planting, lived. One evening in February, with snow falling outside and a fire crackling in the fireplace, they lay together on the couch reading. Shirley had her terrible mystery novel with its medically inaccurate murder. Jacob was finally reading for pleasure again, a biography of an architect he admired. Comfortable silence filled the room, broken only by turning pages and the occasional pop from the fire. "Are you happy?" Shirley asked suddenly. Jacob set down his book and considered the question. "6 months ago you asked me that on the deck. I didn't know how to answer then. But yes, I'm happy. Not content, not just surviving. Actually happy. Are you?" "Yes," Shirley replied, terrified sometimes because happiness feels vulnerable. Like if I acknowledge it, it might disappear. But yes, I'm happy. "It won't disappear," Jacob promised. "Not unless we let it. And I won't let it." "Me neither," Shirley agreed. "We choose this. We keep choosing this." They returned to their books, but Jacob found himself reading the same paragraph 3 times without absorbing it. His mind kept circling back to the same thought. 1 year ago he'd been alone in this house, surviving but not living, measuring worth and achievement while ignoring the emptiness. Now, the house was filled with life, with terrible paintings and cooking smells and Shirley's laughter, with Danny's weekend visits and community garden friends stopping by, and Richard Chen actually joining them for casual dinners instead of just business meetings. Now, there were photographs on the walls, books scattered on surfaces, a piano that was played regularly, imperfectly, joyfully, evidence of life being actually lived instead of just endured. The transformation was complete, not perfect. They still struggled sometimes. Jacob still had moments of wanting to retreat into work when emotions felt too intense. Shirley still had moments of fear that this would end like her engagement to Michael had. But they talked through it, chose vulnerability over safety, chose connection over isolation, chose each other again and again, making the same choice daily that they'd make officially in spring. 1 year ago, Jacob Morris had been alone and dying slowly in luxury. Now he was surrounded by love and living fully in ordinary joy. The difference was everything, and it had started with one person, one nurse who refused to let him hide, who saw through his walls to the wounded human underneath, who taught him that the scariest thing and the most essential thing were the same. Letting someone in, choosing connection, risking everything for the possibility that together might be better than safe. It absolutely was. The wedding took place on a Saturday in late April, when the aspens were just beginning to leaf out, that bright green that only lasts a few weeks before deepening into summer colors. The mountain house had been transformed, not with elaborate decorations, but with simple elegance. White chairs arranged on the deck overlooking the vista, wildflowers in mason jars. The piano moved outside for the occasion. 30 people gathered. Shirley's sister and brother-in-law, Danny in a suit he'd already managed to rumple. Shirley's parents, who'd flown in from Arizona and kept crying happy tears. A handful of her closest friends from the hospital, colleagues who'd watched her transform over the past year from someone who survived to someone who thrived. On Jacob's side, Richard Chen stood as best man, still somewhat amazed that he'd gone from being Jacob's only human contact to being his actual friend. Several executives from Morris Innovations, people who'd known Jacob for years and had never seen him smile genuinely until Shirley. Margaret from the community garden, who'd treated Billionaire Jacob like everyone else and earned his eternal gratitude for it. And Martin, the patient Shirley had asked Jacob to speak with in the emergency room a year ago. The businessman who'd been alone in a hospital bed with no emergency contacts just like Jacob had been. Who'd listened to Jacob's story and made his own choice to change. Who was there with his fiancée, a quiet woman he'd met at a grief support group. Both of them learning to live again after loss. The ceremony was simple. No elaborate religious rituals, no traditional scripts, just 2 people standing before witnesses, speaking truth. Jacob wore a suit but no tie. Shirley wore a dress the color of aspens in autumn, gold and warm and perfectly her. Danny stood between them, holding the rings and taking his role with utmost seriousness. The officiant, a friend of Shirley's sister, spoke briefly about love and courage and the difference between promises made in passion and promises made with full knowledge of how hard keeping them would be. Then it was time for vows. Jacob went first, his voice steady despite the emotion visible on his face. Shirley, 2 years ago I was existing, not living. I'd spent 15 years building walls, convincing myself that isolation was strength, that needing no one made me powerful. I had everything money could buy and absolutely nothing that mattered. He paused, looking at her directly. You saw through all of that. You refused to let me hide. You challenged me to choose living over surviving, connection over safety, vulnerability over control. You taught me that the thing I feared most, needing someone, was actually what makes us human. I promised to choose you every day. Not just today, not just when it's easy, but every day. Especially on the hard days. I promise to be vulnerable even when every instinct tells me to retreat. I promise to keep learning how to be human, how to connect, how to live fully instead of just survive safely. I promise to be worthy of the gift you've given me, which is a life worth living. Tears were streaming down Shirley's face, but she was smiling. She took a breath before speaking her own vows. Jacob, 5 years before I met you, I was betrayed by someone I trusted completely. My response was to build walls so high, I thought nothing could breach them. I convinced myself I was fine alone, that I didn't need partnership or connection or love. I was surviving, telling myself it was enough. Then I saw you in that emergency room, alone and wounded, and trying so hard to convince everyone you preferred it that way. And I recognized myself in you, recognized the lie we tell ourselves that isolation is safety. I promise to see you, truly see you, always. To remind you when you forget that needing people isn't weakness. I promise to build a life with you, not just survive alongside you. I promise to keep painting terrible art that clutters your minimalist aesthetic. Laughter rippled through the small gathering. Jacob grinned through his own tears. I promise to choose courage over fear, Shirley continued. To choose us over safe. To choose vulnerability, even when it terrifies me. To choose you every single day, because you're worth the risk. Danny handed over the rings with careful solemnity. They exchanged them, simple gold bands they'd chosen together. No diamonds, no ostentation, just symbols of a promise they intended to keep. The officiant pronounced them married, and they kissed as the small gathering applauded. The kiss was soft, sweet, full of promise and hope, and the courage of two people who'd chosen each other despite fear. The reception was held inside, casual and warm. No formal seating chart, no elaborate meal. Just good food, good company, and the feeling of being surrounded by people who genuinely cared. Richard Chen gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure. I've been Jacob's attorney for 10 years, he began, holding up his champagne glass. For 8 of those years, I was the only person he spoke to outside of work. I watched him build an empire while disappearing into it. I watched him achieve everything society says matters while losing everything that actually does matter. When the accident happened, I got the call because I was his emergency contact. Not family, not friends. His lawyer, because there was literally no one else. He paused, letting that sink in. Standing here today, seeing him surrounded by people who genuinely love him, seeing him actually smile, not the corporate smile but the real one, I barely recognize him. Shirley, you didn't just save Jacob's life. You gave him a life worth saving. You reminded him what it means to be human. Thank you for that. And Jacob, don't screw this up. More laughter, and Jacob raised his own glass in acknowledgement. Shirley's sister gave a toast next, her voice thick with emotion. My sister spent 5 years convinced she was better off alone. I watched her build walls so high I thought I'd lost her forever. When she called to tell me about Jacob, I was terrified. Another man who might hurt her, another reason to isolate, another wall to build. But then I met him, saw how he looked at her, how he saw her, really saw her, in a way Michael never did. Jacob, you gave my sister permission to risk her heart again. You showed her that one person's failure to see her worth didn't define her worthiness. That's everything. Jacob stood, surprising everyone by giving an impromptu speech. I'm not good at this, he admitted. Public emotion, vulnerability, being this human in front of people. 2 years ago, I would never have attempted this, would have hidden behind careful words and professional distance. But I've learned some things. I've learned that hiding isn't protecting yourself, it's just dying slowly. I've learned that the walls we build to keep pain out also keep everything good out. I've learned that needing people doesn't make you weak. It makes you alive. He turned to Shirley. I love you. Not because you're perfect or because this is easy, but because you saw me when I was invisible, even to myself. Because you refused to let me hide. Because you taught me that surviving isn't the same as living, and I'd been dead for 15 years before that car crash. You gave me my life back, and I'm going to spend every day of it being grateful for that gift, being worthy of that gift, choosing you over every fear and doubt and instinct to retreat. To everyone here, thank you for witnessing this, for being part of our lives, for reminding us that humans need community, connection, people who show up and stay. We're building something here, together, all of us, not just a marriage, but a life that includes you. Thank you for being part of it. The gathering raised their glasses, and the celebration continued. Danny performed a piece on the piano, something Jacob had taught him, stumbling through it with 7-year-old imperfection and absolute joy. People danced, though Jacob and Shirley mostly swayed together, talking quietly, laughing at private jokes, existing in their own bubble while surrounded by love. As evening approached, and the light began to fade, turning the mountains gold and purple, Martin approached Jacob and Shirley where they stood on the deck. I need to thank you both, he said. A year ago, I was exactly where you were, Jacob. Alone in a hospital bed, no emergency contacts, convincing myself I was fine. You talked to me like you understood, because you did. You told me your story, and it gave me permission to change mine. He gestured to the woman beside him. This is Elena. We met at a grief group I never would have attended if you hadn't pushed me. We're getting married in June, and I'm here, at your wedding, with friends and community, and a life that actually means something, because you saw me and refused to let me hide. You did the work, Jacob said. I just told you it was possible. You showed me it was possible, Martin corrected. There's a difference. Words are easy. Living it, proving it, that's what convinced me. So thank you, both of you. After Martin left, Shirley leaned into Jacob. You did that. You helped him. We did that, Jacob corrected. You're the one who asked me to talk to him, who recognized the pattern because you'd seen it in me. We're partners in this, Shirley, in all of it. The reception wound down as night fell. Guests departed with hugs and promises to visit soon. Danny fell asleep on the couch, exhausted from being ring-bearer and pianist and general center of attention. Shirley's sister carried him to the guest room while Shirley and Jacob stood on the deck one more time, watching the stars emerge. We did it, Shirley said softly. Actually got married. Made promises in front of witnesses. No taking it back now. Would you want to? Jacob asked. Take it back? Not even a little bit. You? Not a chance. I'm terrified, but I wouldn't change anything. Good terrified or bad terrified? Good terrified. The kind that means something matters enough to be scary. They stood in comfortable silence, two people who'd learned that silence didn't have to be lonely, that presence was enough, that being together was its own conversation. I have something for you, Jacob said suddenly. Wedding present. We said no gifts, Shirley protested. I know. I got you one anyway. Wait here. He disappeared inside and returned a few minutes later carrying a canvas. He turned it to face her, and Shirley gasped. It was a painting, not one of her terrible ones, but a professional piece. It showed the mountain view from their deck, aspens in autumn gold, mountains in the background, two figures barely visible on the deck. The style was beautiful, skilled, everything her paintings weren't. But in the corner, small but visible, was one of her terrible sunflowers, incorporated into the professional piece like it belonged there, like it made the whole painting better instead of worse. I commissioned it from an artist in Denver, Jacob explained. Gave her one of your paintings to incorporate, because your terrible art is my favorite art. It represents joy without perfection, creation without skill, doing things purely because they make you happy. I wanted that in our wedding present. Professional and imperfect, skilled and joyful, just like us, learning to be both. Shirley was crying again, but she was smiling. I love it. I love you. This is perfect. Just like your paintings, Jacob teased. Perfectly imperfect. They went inside eventually, said goodnight to Shirley's family who were staying in the guest rooms, and retreated to their own room. The room that was theirs now, officially, legally, completely. Later, lying in bed with Shirley curled against him, Jacob felt something he'd never experienced before. Complete peace. Not the absence of challenges or fear or uncertainty, but the presence of something stronger than all of that. Connection, love, partnership, the knowledge that whatever came next, they'd face it together. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Shirley murmured, already half asleep. "For seeing me, for refusing to let me hide, for teaching me how to live." "Thank you for being brave enough to learn," Shirley replied. "For choosing vulnerability, for letting me in." They fell asleep like that, together, two people who'd survived alone now living together, proof that it's never too late to choose differently, to tear down walls, to risk everything for the possibility of genuine connection. The morning after the wedding, they woke to sunlight streaming through windows and the smell of coffee. Shirley's sister had apparently taken over the kitchen, and the sound of Danny's laughter mixed with the clatter of breakfast preparation. "This is our life now," Shirley said, stretching. "Family and noise and people in our space. You okay with that?" Jacob listened to the sounds of life happening in their home. A year ago, the thought would have been intolerable. Now it sounded like everything he'd been missing. "More than okay," he replied. "This is perfect." They joined the family for breakfast, a chaotic meal with Danny asking approximately 700 questions about everything from why wedding cakes are white to how airplanes stay in the sky. Jacob answered each question seriously, engaging with the curiosity, enjoying the chaos. After breakfast, Shirley's family packed up to head back to Denver. Hugs all around, promises to visit soon, Danny making Jacob promise to teach him more piano. Then it was quiet again. Just Jacob and Shirley in their house, married now, the rest of their lives stretching ahead. "Want to go for a hike?" Shirley suggested. "Beautiful day, and we should take advantage before you have to dive back into work tomorrow." "Actually," Jacob said, "I have a different idea. Come with me." He led her to his office, a room she rarely entered because it was his workspace, his domain. But today, it looked different. The massive desk that had dominated the room was gone. In its place, a drafting table, art supplies, natural light streaming through windows he'd apparently had enlarged. "What is this?" Shirley asked. "Your studio," Jacob replied. "You've been using the guest room, but it's small and the light isn't great. So I had this redesigned. Your space, for your terrible art that makes you happy. No productivity metrics, no measurable outcomes, just joy." Shirley walked around the space, touching the supplies, the perfect lighting, the thought behind every detail. "You did this for me. I did this for us," Jacob corrected, "because I've learned that your joy is my joy. Your living fully helps me live fully. We're in this together, remember?" She turned to him, tears streaming down her face again. "How many times am I going to cry today?" "Probably a lot," Jacob said, pulling her close. "We're both emotionally compromised from the wedding. It's allowed." "I love you," she said into his chest. "So much, it scares me. I love you too. And yes, it's terrifying, but we're doing it anyway." They spent the morning in her new studio, Shirley starting a new terrible painting, while Jacob sat nearby reading, both existing in comfortable silence punctuated by easy conversation. This was life, not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but ordinary days made extraordinary by sharing them. The weeks after the wedding settled into a new rhythm. They were married now, which didn't change much practically since they'd been living together for months, but it changed something emotionally. A commitment made public, witnessed, official. They'd chosen each other in front of people, made promises they intended to keep. Jacob threw himself into the Morris Foundation work with renewed energy. The foundation had grown significantly since its inception, now operating in 12 cities across the country. They funded counseling services, community centers, programs specifically designed to help isolated individuals find connection. The impact was measurable. Hundreds of people had been reached, helped, given tools to move from surviving to living. Jacob received emails regularly from people sharing their stories, thanking him for speaking publicly about his isolation, for showing that change was possible. One email came from a woman in Seattle who'd been divorced for 9 years and had convinced herself she was better off alone. "I read your statement about choosing living over surviving," she wrote. "It made me realize I'd been doing exactly what you described, existing but not living. I joined a book club, reconnected with old friends, started therapy. I'm learning to be human again. Thank you for showing it was possible." Jacob shared the email with Shirley that evening. "This is what matters," he said. "Not the company, not the wealth. This, helping people who are where I was." "You're becoming who you were always meant to be," Shirley observed. Not just a tech genius, but someone who actually helps people live better lives. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have. Eventually. I just accelerated the process by refusing to let you hide. Shirley was thriving too. She'd found the perfect balance with part-time hospital work, volunteer activities, her art, and time for actual rest. She'd started a peer support group at the hospital for nurses dealing with burnout, creating space for the kind of vulnerability and connection that had saved her. She'd also started writing. Nothing she intended to publish, just reflections on her journey from isolation to connection, from surviving to living. Jacob read her words and was struck by her insight, her ability to articulate truths he felt but couldn't name. You should share this, he told her, after reading a particularly powerful piece about choosing vulnerability. People need to hear this perspective. Maybe someday, Shirley replied. Right now, it's just for me. Processing, understanding, documenting the transformation. Fair enough. But when you're ready, I think your voice could help a lot of people. 3 months after the wedding, they received unexpected news. Martin and Elena, the couple they'd befriended, were starting their own foundation, focused on supporting people through grief and loss, helping them find connection in the aftermath of devastation. We wanted to tell you first, Martin said over dinner at a restaurant in Boulder, because you inspired this, not just with money or ideas, but by living proof that transformation is possible, that isolation doesn't have to be permanent, that we can choose differently. We're not doing anything special, Jacob protested, just living our lives. That's exactly it, Elena said quietly. She was soft-spoken but intensely present when she did speak. You're not performing transformation for cameras or credit. You're actually living it. That authenticity is what convinced Martin to try. What convinced me? You're proof that the work is worth it. After they left, Shirley turned to Jacob. Do you realize what's happening? We're creating ripples. Our choice to be vulnerable, to connect, to live instead of survive, it's spreading, touching other people, giving them permission to try. Is that okay? Jacob asked. I never intended to be anyone's inspiration. I just wanted to stop being alone. It's more than okay, Shirley replied. It's beautiful. This is legacy, Jacob. Not your company or your wealth, but the lives you touch by choosing courage over fear. That night, lying in bed, Jacob found himself reflecting on the past 2 years. From the car crash that should have killed him to the hospital room where he met Shirley. From the mountain house that had been a beautiful prison to the home it had become. From isolation to connection, surviving to living, fear to courage. The transformation was complete. Not perfect, because perfection wasn't the goal and wasn't possible, but real, sustained, genuine. He still had moments of wanting to retreat, moments when vulnerability felt too risky and walls felt safer. But now he had tools to recognize those moments for what they were. Fear trying to masquerade as wisdom, and he had Shirley, who saw through his retreats and called him back to courage. Similarly, Shirley had moments of doubt, moments when old wounds reminded her that trust could be broken, that promises could be empty. But she'd learned to sit with those feelings instead of running from them, to speak them aloud instead of building walls around them. And she had Jacob, who met her vulnerability with his own, who proved daily that some people keep their promises. They were healing together, learning together, living together. And in doing so, they were proving that the scariest thing and the most essential thing were the same. Letting someone in, choosing connection, risking everything for the possibility of genuine love. Before we reach the conclusion of this journey, before I share the final truths this story reveals, I need to speak directly to you one more time. We've traveled with Jacob and Shirley from isolation to connection, from surviving to living, from fear to courage. We've watched two people who'd mastered being alone learn how to be together. We've witnessed transformation that was hard-earned, imperfect, and absolutely real. If this story has moved you, if something about their journey resonates in that carefully guarded place in your heart, I need you to do something right now. Hit that like button, not just as approval, but as a commitment to your own transformation, your own choice to live instead of just survive. Share this video with someone who needs it. That person in your life who's been alone too long, who's convinced themselves that isolation is strength, who's forgotten what genuine connection feels like. Send them this story. Tell them it's possible to choose differently. Subscribe to Mr. Dawson Stories and turn on notifications. Because this is what we do here. We tell truths about life, love, loss, and the courage it takes to be genuinely human. We're building a community of people who believe in messy, imperfect, courageous connection. Join us and drop a comment answering this question. What's one choice you're going to make today to move from surviving to living? Just one choice. Name it. Commit to it. That's how transformation begins. One choice at a time. Now let's finish this story the way it deserves. With truth, with hope, with the moral lessons that make all of this matter. 1 year after their wedding, Jacob and Shirley sat down for an interview with a journalist writing a piece about the Morris Foundation. They'd agreed to this interview specifically because the journalist had promised to focus on the message, not the romance. On the universal truths, not the individual story. The interview took place at their home, on the deck where Jacob had first confessed his love, where they'd stood together countless times watching mountains and sky and the changing seasons. The journalist, a thoughtful woman named Patricia, started with an unexpected question. What do you want people to understand about isolation? Not your isolation specifically, but the phenomenon itself. Jacob and Shirley looked at each other, that wordless communication of people who'd learned to think together. Jacob spoke first. I want people to understand that isolation is a choice we make after being hurt. It feels like protection, like strength, like wisdom. We tell ourselves we're fine alone, that we don't need anyone, that independence is power. But it's actually fear dressed up as virtue. And the longer you maintain it, the more it calcifies into identity instead of defense mechanism. Shirley added, and I want people to know that choosing isolation is understandable. When someone betrays your trust, when love fails, when you're devastated by another person, building walls makes complete sense. It's not weakness or failure to retreat and protect yourself. But there's a difference between temporary healing and permanent isolation, between taking time to recover and deciding you'll never risk connection again. Patricia nodded, taking notes. So when did you each realize your isolation had shifted from healing to harm? For me, Jacob said, it was in the hospital, when Shirley pointed out that I had no emergency contacts except my attorney. When I realized I'd spent 15 years measuring success in dollars while having absolutely no one who'd miss me if I died. That moment of stark truth, it cracked something open. Shirley was quiet for a moment before answering. I realized it when my nephew was born. I was staying with my sister, surrounded by family chaos, and I felt more alive than I had in 5 years. I'd convinced myself I was fine alone, but fine isn't the same as good. Fine is just less bad than being hurt. I wanted more than fine. What would you say to someone who's isolated right now? Patricia asked. Someone who's reading this article and recognizing themselves in your story. Jacob leaned forward, his intensity visible. I'd say you're not protecting yourself. You're killing yourself slowly. Every day you choose isolation is a day you're not actually living. And I understand the fear. I understand thinking it's safer this way. But I'm here to tell you that safety without connection is just a comfortable prison. Shirley's response was gentler but no less direct. I'd say you don't have to change everything at once. You don't have to tear down all your walls immediately, or trust people completely, or risk everything today. Start small. One connection. One honest conversation. One moment of vulnerability. See what happens. Learn that not everyone will hurt you. That some risks are worth taking. Patricia asked about the foundation, about their marriage, about their daily lives, but she kept returning to the central question. How do we help people move from surviving to living? You can't force it, Shirley said. People have to choose it themselves, but you can create conditions that make choosing easier. You can share stories that give permission. You can build communities that welcome people safely. You can prove through your own life that transformation is possible. Jacob added, and you can tell the truth about how hard it is. Choosing connection over isolation isn't easy. It's terrifying. You'll have setbacks. You'll want to retreat. There will be moments when you think you were safer behind walls. But if you keep choosing, keep risking, keep showing up, eventually it gets easier. Eventually connection becomes natural instead of terrifying. What's been the hardest part of your transformation? Patricia asked. Trusting it, Jacob said immediately. Every day, especially in the beginning, I waited for it to fall apart. For Shirley to leave, for this to be revealed as temporary, for the walls to be proven right. Learning to trust that this was real, that it would last, that I deserved it, that was harder than the initial choice to be vulnerable. Shirley nodded. Same. I kept waiting for Jacob to hurt me like Michael did. To choose someone else, to decide I was too much work, to prove that my walls were justified. Learning to trust his consistency, his choice to keep choosing me, that took time. Still takes effort some days. But you keep choosing, Patricia observed. We keep choosing, they said in unison, then laughed. Because the alternative is going back to isolation, Jacob explained. And now that I know what living actually feels like, surviving isn't enough anymore. I can't unknow what I've learned, can't unfeel what I've felt. So yes, we keep choosing, every day. The article, when it published, went viral even faster than Jacob's original statement had. The headline read, "From Surviving to Living, Two People Explain Why Isolation Isn't Safety." It featured their story but focused on the universal truths. The danger of choosing permanent isolation after temporary hurt, the difference between healing and hiding, the courage required to risk connection after betrayal, the possibility of transformation at any age, any stage, any level of entrenchment. The comments section filled with people sharing their own stories, recognizing their own isolation, committing to one small choice toward connection, thanking Jacob and Shirley for permission to try. One comment stood out to Jacob. It came from a man who'd been widowed 10 years earlier. "I've been alone since my wife died," he wrote. "Told myself I was honoring her memory by never moving on. But reading your story, I realize I was just afraid. Afraid of loving and losing again. Afraid of dishonoring her by being happy. Your story gave me permission to try. I'm joining a grief group next week. Thank you for showing that it's never too late." Jacob showed the comment to Shirley that evening. "This is why we did the interview. This right here." Shirley read it, tears gathering in her eyes. "We're giving people permission to live. That's everything." The years continued. Jacob and Shirley's life together deepened in ways that couldn't be measured or quantified. They traveled, exploring places Jacob had only visited for business and places Shirley had dreamed of seeing. They continued their work with the foundation, watching it grow and impact more lives. They hosted dinners at their home, building community intentionally, creating the kind of connections they'd both been missing for years. Danny grew up with Uncle Jacob as a fixture in his life. Jacob taught him coding, attended every science fair, funded his education with the casual generosity of someone who'd learned that wealth meant nothing if you didn't share it with people you loved. Martin and Elena became genuine friends. The four of them met monthly for dinner, supporting each other, laughing together, building the kind of deep friendship that comes from shared understanding and mutual vulnerability. Richard Chen remained part of their lives too. No longer just Jacob's attorney, but a true friend who brought his own partner to gatherings, who'd learned from watching Jacob that work wasn't enough, that life required more than professional success. The community garden continued. Margaret, now in her 80s, still directed operations with gentle authority, still treated Jacob like everyone else, still represented the kind of authentic humanity he'd been missing for so long. Shirley's painting improved slightly, though her work remained charmingly terrible. Jacob loved every piece, hung them throughout the house, created a gallery of imperfection that represented joy over skill, process over product. Jacob's piano playing improved significantly. He practiced regularly, the imperfect music filling their home with sound and life. Sometimes Shirley sang along, off-key and unself-conscious. Sometimes Danny joined on violin, the three of them creating chaos that sounded nothing like music and everything like family. This was life. Not perfect, not always easy, but real and full and lived instead of merely survived. 5 years after the wedding, on the anniversary of Jacob's accident, they returned to the spot on Mountain Ridge Road where everything had changed. The tree they'd planted had grown, its leaves bright gold in the autumn sun. They stood there quietly, remembering. Jacob thought about the man he'd been, accepting death with eerie calm because nothing in his life mattered enough to fight for. Shirley thought about the nurse she'd been, competent and isolated, surviving but not living. "We've come so far," Shirley said softly. "We have," Jacob agreed. "From here, from this exact spot where I almost died, to everything we've built together." "Do you ever regret it?" Shirley asked. "The vulnerability, the risk, the work of staying connected?" "Never," Jacob said without hesitation. "Not for a single second." "You? Not even a little bit." "Scared, sometimes, yes. Uncertain sometimes, but never regretful." They stood there as the sun set, turning the mountains the colors they'd both learned to love. Gold and purple and that particular quality of light that only happened in autumn in the Rockies. "Ready to go home?" Jacob asked eventually. "Home," Shirley agreed. "To the life we built, together." And that's the truth this story reveals. Not shocking in the tabloid sense, but profound in the human sense. Jacob Morris was alone for years, not because circumstances forced it, but because he chose it. Chose safety over connection, chose control over vulnerability, chose surviving over living. He built an empire while forgetting to build a life, achieved everything society values while losing everything that actually matters, until a car crash took the choice away, until a nurse refused to let him hide, until he learned that the thing he'd feared most, needing someone, trusting someone, loving someone, was actually the only thing worth having. This isn't just their story. It's the story of everyone who's chosen isolation after hurt. Everyone who's built walls so high they forgot why they built them. Everyone who's confused surviving with success, independence with strength, safety with actually living. The shocking truth revealed is this: you can have everything money can buy and absolutely nothing that matters. You can be surrounded by luxury and completely alone. You can survive for years, decades even, while never actually living. And the even more profound truth: it only takes one person, one genuine human connection to change everything, to transform survival into living, to turn an empty house into a home, to remind you that being human means needing other humans. But here's the part that matters most. You don't have to wait for a crisis. You don't need a car crash to wake you up. You can choose today, right now, to reach out, to tear down one wall, to risk one connection, to move from surviving to living, because surviving isn't enough, and you deserve more than just making it through each day. You deserve to actually live. Maybe you're Jacob right now, isolated, convinced you're fine, measuring worth and achievement while ignoring the emptiness. This is your warning. That emptiness will kill you, even if your heart keeps beating. Choose differently. Choose today. Maybe you're Shirley. You've been hurt, built walls, survived alone, and you're wondering if it's worth risking again. This is your permission. Yes, it's terrifying. Yes, you might get hurt, but the alternative, living behind walls forever, is worse. Be brave. Try again. Maybe you're Martin, just starting to recognize your isolation, not sure if change is possible. This is your hope. It's never too late. 15 years, 50 years, however long you've been alone, today can be the day you choose differently. Start small. One connection, one risk, one choice. Or maybe you're the person who could be someone's Shirley, the one who sees through the walls, who refuses to let someone hide, who offers connection to someone convinced they don't need it. This is your call. Reach out. That isolated friend, that lonely family member, that disconnected coworker. You could be the person who changes everything for them. Because we're not built for isolation. We're built for connection, for vulnerability, for the terrifying, beautiful, messy experience of being genuinely human with other humans. Jacob Morris learned this the hard way, but he learned it, and his life transformed from empty survival to genuine living. The question is, what about you? Are you living or just surviving? Are your walls protecting you or imprisoning you? Is today the day you choose differently? Because surviving isn't enough, and you deserve more than just making it through. You deserve to actually live. The choice is yours. Choose wisely. Choose bravely. Choose connection. Jacob and Shirley chose each other, chose vulnerability over safety, chose living over surviving. And in doing so, they proved that it's never too late. That transformation is possible. That one person can change everything. That the scariest thing and the most essential thing are the same. Letting someone in. Trusting again. Risking everything for the possibility of genuine love. It was worth it. Every moment of fear, every risk, every vulnerable choice. It was absolutely worth it. And it can be for you too. Choose to live. Choose connection. Choose courage. Your story doesn't have to end in isolation. It can transform, just like theirs did. But only if you choose it. So choose. Today. Now. Choose to live. This is Mr. Dawson Stories, reminding you that the best stories aren't about perfect people who never struggle. They're about real people who choose courage over fear, connection over isolation, living over merely surviving. Be brave enough to write your own story. Be courageous enough to let someone in. Be human enough to need other humans. We'll be here, telling the truth about what that takes, about what it costs, about why it's worth it. Until next time, choose wisely. Choose bravely. Choose to live. Because you deserve more than survival. You deserve a life worth living. And that starts with one choice. One connection, one moment of courage. Make that choice. Live that life. Be that brave. Your story is waiting, and it can be extraordinary if you're willing to risk it. Choose connection. Choose vulnerability. Choose love. Choose to live.